This is Denise Boehm, back with Host-Telecom at OpenStack Summit in Sydney, and we're winding up the day and want to share a little bit of news as we go on. We did ask people to help us rename Kangi the kangaroo, because Kangi was such a pathetic name, and we have a winner. And I would like to congratulate Jonah Spector for renaming Kangi the Sydney kangaroo to Hooper. So I'm going to send this to you, Jonah. Maybe you can share it with your sister if it's not to your taste. We'll find something that you like. So moving right along, I would like to introduce our very special guest, Ben Kepes, industry commentator on OpenStack, open source, and the technology of the day, really. So thanks for joining us, Ben.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
It's nice to have you with us. And we have had a chance to chat with Ben once or twice since we got here. And so I'm going to ask him some of the same questions that I asked him when we were at dinner. And that is where Ben sees OpenStack playing out, and kind of the tenor of this summit, starting with that, and then asking you a little bit more where you see OpenStack in the overall world of open source.
Sure. So in terms of this show, I think it's the first time it's been down here in Australia. It's a long way from most markets, so it's lower numbers than other events, maybe a little bit subdued. I think one of the issues that the OpenStack Foundation has had to grapple with over the years has been that when it first started, essentially it was an initiative started by Rackspace and NASA to kind of crush Amazon. It was the Amazon killer, AWS killer, and clearly that hasn't happened. It's never going to happen. That's not to say that OpenStack doesn't have a valid opportunity or a valid part to play in the world of technology. It certainly does. But it's taken a while to kind of throw off those vestiges of failing to kill Amazon. So I think what we're seeing now, I think OpenStack has turned a corner. I think what we're seeing with the telco use cases, with some large Chinese organisations using it, some public cloud vendors being built on OpenStack, all those are really valid. I don't think many people are making significant amounts of money out of selling OpenStack, but lots of people making money out of selling products, services that are built on top of OpenStack. So I kind of think I think OpenStack needs to. The other concern I have is that increasingly the world is very excited about containers and things like Kubernetes have incredible mindshare, and there is this concern that maybe OpenStack becomes this slightly boring layer of plumbing underneath, and the exciting stuff is the applications on top of that, which are fundamentally or increasingly are going to be driven by things like Kubernetes. So while it's sacrilegious, I kind of have been talking to people this week about the idea of the OpenStack Foundation and the Cloud Native Foundation, CNCF, actually merging. I don't think that will happen. Not because it's not a good idea, but more because of sort of the politics of the situation. So yeah, it's been an interesting show, as they always are, and interesting to talk to customers.
Right, and we talked a lot about where OpenStack started, and you've just addressed that. But we're Host-Telecom, and we put OpenStack on bare metal. And one of your first questions to us was, are you going? Is your lead OpenStack? And I'd like you to go into a little more depth about what your concern was behind that question.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, your customers want a solution. They want a performant cloud, some performant infrastructure, some economical infrastructure. They don't and shouldn't care what it's built upon. How many Amazon AWS customers know what AWS is built on? How many Google customers, GCP customers, or Microsoft Azure customers really know that fundamentally? So I think going to a customer and saying, hey, you should buy our product because it's built on OpenStack, just doesn't, to me, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You should use OpenStack because you're able to build the best platform that you can on OpenStack, and you should sell that best platform to your customers as the best platform.
And that was actually, you led into my next question, which was, do you believe that using OpenStack will actually create a more powerful, potentially more scalable, flexible solution than necessarily going with a proprietary platform? Or do you think that's going to depend on who creates the solutions and how they implement them?
Yeah, it's not cut and dried. I don't think, it's not a zero-sum game. I don't think it's, VMware has gone and is dead and OpenStack's going to take it over. I think it's a case of courses. I mean, clearly OpenStack requires more management, more operating overhead maybe than a VMware cloud does. But clearly there's some economic benefits out of using an open source product. So it really comes down to the desire of the user, or the intention of the user. And so for what you're doing, your kind of secret sauce or your value proposition is a highly customized, a highly tuned offering to what a particular customer requires. That is arguably easier to do on a platform like OpenStack than it would be on a more proprietary sort of VMware style platform.
And do you think that somebody who does employ whether on purpose or just because they choose a specific platform like OpenStack, do you think that the customer is going to have to be more highly knowledgeable to adopt an OpenStack-based solution than if they went with VMware, even if VMware is expensive and maybe it doesn't solve all of their issues?
I mean, I think in the early days of OpenStack, it was very much the case that OpenStack required a lot of engineering, a lot more engineering than competitive platforms. That is less the case than it used to be, but still, arguably, one is buying OpenStack or one is using OpenStack for different reasons, and part of that is the customization, the ability to tinker, as it were. So, I think customers need to look at both the total cost of ownership, both the cost of the platform and the cost of the operation overhead to put it into place, but also the return on investment. And it really depends what an organisation is trying to do and where its sort of core competency lies.
We talked earlier today to Rob Hirschfeld from Racken and to Graham Hayes from DNS, and they went into, of course, Graham went into what's going on with the DNS project here at OpenStack, and Rob more into the not necessarily containerization, but the containerization and orchestration of OpenStack. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on that. And I know you've already said, maybe Kubernetes and OpenStack aren't going to get married in a white wedding tomorrow, but what are your ideas on that?
Yeah, I mean, a term I use all the time is fabrics, and I think everyone pretty much agrees that the world is going to be both multi-cloud, i.e. multiple horizontal clouds, public and private, and also hybrid cloud, i.e. virtualization, bare metal, more traditional infrastructures, and then containerized and or serverless. So I think fabrics that span both vertically and horizontal, those different sort of operating methodologies, and whether those fabrics are monitoring, management, orchestration, but getting some consistency across the multitude of different solutions that people use is going to be increasingly important.
I have no choice but to agree with you. I would like to bring in Ilya Stechkin to see if he has anything to add to our conversation. We've talked about multiple things, and I just wanted to see if there's anything he wanted to add, or Ben, if there's anything you would like to add at this point.
I mean, I think my reflection is that I've been around OpenStack since it was first announced, way back in the day. I think that I get troubled by the very polarized sort of commentary, OpenStack's dead or OpenStack isn't dead. It's not a zero-sum game. I think OpenStack is successful at what it does, and we should focus on what are the right things that people are doing in OpenStack, or what are the right things to be done in OpenStack, and what are not.
And what was named as the most right thing to do?
I mean, I think that, as I was saying before, I think the thing with OpenStack is it gives organisations the ability to tailor infrastructure to their particular requirements. So if you want something that is somewhat standard, somewhat generic, then there's no reason not to use GCP, Azure or AWS. If you want to be able to mix and match, to customise more highly, to tailor things to your particular operation, OpenStack is potentially a better option.
And I'm curious if you think that the evolution of OpenStack to be more customer friendly, do you see that as having taken a longer time than any other new technology, or do you see that basically on par with other emerging technologies in cloud or anywhere else?
I mean, the reality is that I've been to lots and lots of OpenStack summits, and they've all been the expo hall has always been awash with large vendors who are there for commercial reasons. And the early days of OpenStack, everyone, from HP to Intel to IBM to Dell EMC, were all involved. And I think that involvement it's been great because it's put money and resource into the community, but it's also been problematic because all of those vendors, every vendor involved, has put their oar in with their particular commercial kind of drivers. So I think because of that, it's taken longer than is ideal. That's not a reflection on open source approaches per se. It's a reflection on the commercial realities of a very, very broad ecosystem.
Did you see that as similar to Linux in the early days of Linux, or do you think that moved along a little bit faster?
No, because Linux had a dictator. Linux had Linus, who was determining where it was going. It wasn't until a lot later on that there were actually commercial interests involved, and he could be the benign dictator. OpenStack has never had that, and it's been problematic.
Yeah, that's very true.
I'm sorry, probably I missed something because at the camera it's not the best place to hear the conversation, but now we have an insider from the closed door of Analytic Group. What was the main outcome of today's discussion?
Yeah, so we spent a couple of hours this morning in the Analyst Summit. So a few things there. We talked about, roadmap in terms of where the foundation is going and where it's focusing on. We talked about, obviously the new members, the Tencent's come on board. We spent quite a lot of time with customers talking about what they're doing. So I spent some time with AT&T, Verizon, AAG Insurance, and China UnionPay, looking at what they're doing. It was a pretty interesting conversation. It's great talking with organisations that are actually using a product in production, and more about an operating conversation than more of an existential one.
I'm sorry, is there anything specific from the roadmap you're permitted to tell us?
So it wasn't. I mean, there was nothing that was there that we didn't hear in the keynote yesterday. So really, just a reiteration of the fact that the foundation is going to focus more on the core. That the kind of the idea of the big tent, where any project.
So the big tent is done.
The big tent is dead. It's no longer the place where any orphan project can come to die.
You're trying to keep yourself from crying?
It's going to be a much more focused foundation, as it should be, I think.
I would really like to thank you, Ben, for joining us this afternoon and sharing your insights. Always interesting. You're always an amazing read, and it's been a complete pleasure to meet you in person and have you join us today. And hopefully it's the first of many meetings where we cross paths with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.